What happens when you disrespect the unseen, treading where even the living fear to go? It was a still, humid night as we drove back home after a family gathering. My name is Adia, and I was sitting in the back seat of our old car. The city roads, usually bustling, had been chaotic, forcing my father, Nkem, to take an unfamiliar detour. "This is a shortcut," he said confidently, though the tight grip on the steering wheel betrayed his nerves. The narrow road we turned onto was suffocated by tall, overhanging trees, their shadows forming haunting patterns under the car's headlights. It was eerily quiet. No other cars, no pedestrians, not even the faint hum of city life. "This road feels strange," my mother, Ifoma, murmured, her eyes darting around nervously. "It's fine," Nkem replied, his voice firm. "We'll be home soon." Minutes passed, and the oppressive silence made me restless. The road seemed endless, as though we were driving deeper into another world. "I need to use the bathroom," Ifoma said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Can't you hold it?" Nkem asked, irritated. "No," she snapped. "Stop the car." With a frustrated sigh, he pulled over near a clearing where the trees parted slightly. The headlights illuminated a patch of grass with scattered stones that looked oddly out of place. Ifoma stepped out and disappeared toward the bushes. "Be quick," Nkem called after her. I waited, watching the still trees outside. Minutes ticked by and she hadn't returned. "What's taking her so long?" Nkem grumbled, opening the car door. "Stay here, Adia." I watched as he approached the bushes. His flashlight beam wavered, then steadied as he stopped abruptly. "What are you doing?" His voice boomed, cutting through the silence. "Do you realize that's a grave?" Ifoma's response was dismissive, her tone unusually cold. "So what? It's just dirt. It doesn't mean anything." Ikem's face darkened with anger, but he said nothing. He returned to the car, dragging Ifoma along. Her expression was distant, almost defiant. "Let's go," he muttered, starting the car. As we drove, the tension inside the vehicle thickened. I noticed Ifoma glancing repeatedly at the rearview mirror, her face pale. "What's wrong, Mama?" I asked softly. "There's someone following us," she whispered. Her words sent a chill down my spine. I turned to look through the rear window, but the darkness outside was impenetrable. "Mama, there's no one there," I said, trying to sound calm. "Don't lie to me," she hissed, her voice trembling. "I can see him. He's there." Nkem tightened his grip on the wheel. "Stop it, Ifoma. You're scaring us." But her breathing grew erratic. Her eyes remained glued to the mirror, unblinking. Then, without warning, she opened her door and stepped out while the car was still moving. "Ifoma!" Nkem shouted, slamming on the brakes. "Whoa!" We scrambled out, the cold air biting at our skin. "Mama!" I screamed into the darkness, my voice echoing into nothingness. She was gone. We searched desperately, calling her name, but the stillness of the road swallowed our voices. Then, faintly, a sound reached us, a low, mournful cry. "It's her," I whispered, pointing toward the graveyard she had urinated on earlier. Nkem grabbed a flashlight and we followed the sound. It grew louder, more desperate, as though she was trapped somewhere just beyond our reach. "Help me dig," Nkem said when we reached the disturbed soil. I thought. My hands trembled as we clawed at the earth, the cries now deafening. When we finally unearthed the lid of a wooden coffin, my father hesitated. He didn't like to be in the shadows, he explained, and drove the coffin to the front of the yard. "Open it," I urged, my heart pounding. With a deep breath, he lifted the lid. Inside was Ifoma, her face frozen in terror. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. As Nkem reached for her, her body crumbled into ash, disintegrating before our eyes. We stared, horrified, as a note fluttered out from the casket. Inkem picked it up with shaking hands. It read, "The debt has been paid." We stood in stunned silence, the night pressing in around us. My father's face was a mask of grief and disbelief. "What does it mean?" I asked, tears streaming down my cheeks. "I don't know," he whispered, clutching the note. I saw her eyebrows rising as she gazed at him. The road seemed darker, the air colder. As we returned to the car, the sound of footsteps echoed behind us. We didn't turn back. From that day on, we never spoke of the incident again, but the memories haunted us. The road wasn't just a shortcut. It was a boundary, a place where the living and the dead crossed paths. And we had trespassed. Life was never the same after that night. My father, once a man of unshakable resolve, seemed to shrink into himself. He grew quieter, spending long hours staring blankly at the walls, as if searching for answers in their shadows. As for me, the silence in the house became unbearable. It wasn't just the absence of my mother, it was the lingering presence of something else. I could feel it in the stillness of the night, hear it in the creaks of the wooden floorboards, and sense it in the shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they should. One evening, about a month after the incident, I found my father in the living room, poring over old books and maps. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. "What are you looking for, Papa?" I asked hesitantly. He didn't look up. "Answers," he said simply. "There has to be a reason, a rule we broke, something we didn't understand." I sat beside him, glancing at the worn pages filled with symbols and diagrams. The books looked ancient, their words faded but powerful. "Come in," Clara said, leading me inside. "What if we can't find answers?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me then, his gaze fierce. "We have to try, Adya. Your mother, she didn't just vanish. She was taken." She turned her head toward the flames. It sparkled. The first real clue came a few days later when we visited a local diviner. He lived on the outskirts of town, in a small hut surrounded by a garden of medicinal herbs and sacred symbols. The air around his home felt heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin prickle. "What can we do? How do we bring her back?" Uji regarded him carefully. "Bringing her back will not be simple. The spirit world demands balance. To retrieve her, you must offer something of equal value." "What does that mean?" I blurted out, unable to contain my frustration. He turned to me, his gaze piercing. "It means that for a life to be returned, another must be given." The ride home was silent. My father gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. I could tell his mind was racing, weighing impossible choices. "Papa, we can't," I said finally. "We can't trade another life for Mama's. She wouldn't want that." He didn't respond, but the flicker of pain in his eyes told me he agreed. Over the next few weeks, we tried everything else: prayers, rituals, offerings, every possible way to appease the spirits without making the ultimate sacrifice. But nothing worked. If anything, the house grew more oppressive, as if the very air was angry with us. One night, I woke to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was a dream, but the voices were too real, too insistent. I followed the sound to the living room, where my father was sitting in the dark, talking to someone I couldn't see. "Papa?" I called softly, stepping closer. He turned to me, his face pale. "Adya, they've given me an answer." "Who?" I asked, my voice shaking. "The spirits," he said, his voice hollow. "They said there's another way, a test." Magnified through telescope. The test was to return to the road, alone, and confront whatever had taken Ifoma. The spirits demanded bravery, an acknowledgement of our trespass, and an acceptance of whatever judgment they deemed fit. It was madness, but my father was resolute, Despite my protests, he insisted on going alone, leaving me with the promise that he would return by dawn. That night, I sat by the window, watching the road anxiously. Hours passed, and the darkness outside seemed to deepen, swallowing the world whole. Then, just as the first light of dawn broke through the horizon, I saw him. My father was walking up the road, his steps slow and deliberate. I ran out to meet him, my heart pounding. "Mama, did it work? Did you see her?" He didn't respond immediately. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were wet with tears. "They let her go," he said softly. Behind him, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Ifoma. She looked different, pale and quiet, but alive. I ran to her, tears streaming down my face as I embraced her. She didn't say much, only held me tightly. Life didn't return to normal after that. Ifoma was distant, her once vibrant personality replaced by a quiet stillness. She avoided the mirrors in the house and rarely left her room. One night I woke to find her standing by the window, staring into the darkness. "Mama?" I called gently. She turned to me, her eyes hollow. "They said I belong to them now. One day they'll come for me again." And with that she walked back to her bed, leaving me frozen with fear. We had brought her back, but at what cost? The spirits had let her go, but their claim on her soul remained. And deep down I knew that the road was waiting for her, for us, for anyone who dared to cross its path again. Some debts could never truly be repaid. Over the next few weeks, my mother's words echoed in my mind. One day they'll come for me again. Life was shrouded in unease, as if an invisible force loomed over our home. My father became a shadow of himself, trying desperately to keep our family together, but something had shifted, something we couldn't reverse. At night, I often found my mother staring at nothing, her gaze fixed on the corners of rooms where no one stood. Sometimes, she would hum a tune that wasn't familiar, low and haunting, sending shivers down my spine. I would ask her about it, but she'd just shake her head, as if she didn't realize she was doing it. One evening as I was tidying up, a knock came at the door. It was soft but deliberate, echoing eerily in the still house. My father and I exchanged glances. "Who could that be at this hour?" he muttered, rising cautiously to open the door. When he did, there was no one there. Instead, sitting on the doorstep was a small clay pot, painted with intricate symbols and filled with dark, oily liquid. A folded piece of cloth rested beside it, bearing a single word: "Prepare." My father stared at the offering, his face pale. Without a word, he grabbed the pot and cloth, brought them inside, and locked the door behind him. "What does it mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It's a warning," he said quietly. "They're coming." That night he stayed awake, pacing the living room while muttering prayers under his breath. I couldn't sleep either. Something about the pot seemed alive, as though it radiated energy that hummed in my chest. By morning, my mother was worse. She barely spoke and had taken to sitting by the window. Her eyes glazed over as she watched the empty road outside. "They're close," she murmured one day, sending chills down my spine. "I can feel them." Desperation drove us back to Oji, the diviner. He examined the pot and the cloth, his expression grim. "They have marked your household," he said. "This is not just about her anymore. They are tied to all of you now." "What do they want?" my father asked. "They want what was promised. They are bound by rules and one was broken. If you do not satisfy their claim, they will take everyone." "Then what can we do?" I asked, tears welling up. Oji took a deep breath. The ritual was set for the next full moon. Oji prepared charms, herbs, and offerings for the spirits. We were instructed to bring nothing but ourselves, the clay pot, and unwavering courage. When the night came, the three of us, my father, mother, and I, drove back to the cursed road. The air felt heavier as we approached, and the car headlights barely penetrated the darkness. Steve and I spent the rest of the night talking gradually out of the perception possibilities of what death might be. OG met us at the clearing, his figure a reassuring presence despite the fear that gripped us. "Stand in a circle," he commanded, lighting a fire in the center. "Do not break the circle, no matter what happens." The ritual began with OG chanting in a language I didn't understand. The flames grew higher, casting flickering shadows that seemed to move on their own. Then, the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind rustling through the trees, but soon growing louder. It was the same eerie crying we'd heard on the night my mother disappeared. "They are here," OG said, his voice steady. "Do not look away from the fire." But my mother was trembling, her gaze darting around. "They're calling me," she whispered. I grabbed her hand. "Mama, stay with us." Suddenly, the shadows around us began to take shape. Elongated figures with glowing eyes. They circled us, their presence suffocating. "May have you returned?" a voice boomed, deep and otherworldly. "We seek forgiveness," OG said firmly. "The living made a mistake. We offer restitution." "You cannot undo what has been done," the voice replied. "The balance must be restored." The figures moved closer, and the ground beneath us seemed to tremble. My mother began to sob, and my father pulled her closer. "Take me," he shouted suddenly. "Take my life instead." The man said, "No," I cried, clutching his arm. The spirits paused, their glowing eyes fixed on him. "Your sacrifice would suffice," the voice said. "But know this, your family will carry this curse forever. The debt will not die with you." My father hesitated, looking at me and my mother with tear-filled eyes. "I will do it," he said, "to protect you both." But before he could step forward, my mother broke free from his grip. "No," she screamed. "They came for me. Let them take me and end this." The spirits surged forward, and I felt a force pull me back as my parents were engulfed in a blinding light. When I woke, the road was empty. My parents were gone, and OG was standing over me, his face somber. "They chose to pay the price," he said quietly. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the truth. They had both sacrificed themselves to save me. I never returned to the road. The house felt emptier than ever, but I carried their love and sacrifice in my heart. Yet even now I sometimes hear whispers in the night, faint and mournful. The spirits had taken their due, but the curse remained, a reminder that some boundaries are never meant to be crossed.